Hello, my name's Emma Wilder, and in today's presentation we'll look at risk management for charities. In this session we'll discuss what is risk management, we'll look at a risk management policy, and we'll also explore how to develop a risk register. By the end of this session, you'll understand what risk management is and why it's important, and you'll also know how to develop a risk register and use the risk register template. So, what is risk management? Risk management forms a part of an organisation's internal control and corporate governance arrangements. It's about managing the risks within an organisation so that they are either reduced, accepted, avoided, or transferred. The definition of risk is the threat or possibility that an action or an event will adversely affect an organisation's ability to achieve its objectives, and the possibility that a beneficial action or event will be overlooked or responded to inadequately. And it's this second one that people often forget about. We all look for the negatives, don't we? We all think about what's the worst thing that could happen. But equally, we don't think about what's the best thing that could happen. And sometimes something that seems really positive is actually a risk if you've not got the resources to respond to that. So now we're going to look at a risk management policy. So what are the key elements of a risk management policy? Well, a risk management policy sets out the charity's approach to risk management. It also defines the charity's risk appetite. It sets out the different roles of trustees and staff in relation to risk management, and it defines what the risk register will include. And finally, it defines the impact scores of risk. So let's take a look at a risk management policy. So here's a template risk management policy. So as you can see, it's got the title at the top, which just explains what the policy aims to do. On the next page, it explains the purpose of the document, and it also goes through the definition of risk that we've just discussed. And then we have the risk management policy statement. So you can see in this example that the charity will generally be risk neutral in its decision making, but it may accept higher risk where their impact was within the stated risk appetite. We then look at the underlying approach to risk management. So this states that the Board of Trustees have responsibility for overseeing risk management within the charity, and that they're going to be open and receptive in the approach to risk, and then who's responsible for advising and implementing this policy. It then goes on to discuss the risk appetite. So as you can see, a risk appetite is the measure of the extent to which a charity will accept or tolerate risks. So some organisations are more risk averse, some are more risk taking. Most charities tend to be risk neutral, but they might be more risk taking in certain instances and more risk averse in certain instances as well. The policy then goes out to define the respective roles of the Board of Trustees, any senior management if you have it, and also you may wish to have a risk champion. So this is a person usually on the senior management team who takes ownership of risk management. It then goes on to define what will be in the risk register. So the risk register for each risk will define the risk, provide full details of it, list any contributing factors, describe the impact of the risk if no action is taken, assess the likelihood and impact of the risk, identify the controls already in place and their effectiveness, outline any specific actions to mitigate or eliminate the risk, state the organisation's tolerance to the risk, for example, to avoid, accept, reduce or transfer it, and specify the person responsible for managing the risk and the timescales. It then goes on to give you the scoring matrix. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got the impact, and on the right-hand side, we've got the likelihood. Now, the reason we do a scale of 1 to 4 is because you can't go in the middle. If you did a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, it's really easy for people to plump in the middle, and then you don't get any almost separation in the risk and everything's all lumped together. So here you can see for the likelihood, we've got 1 is remote, so at less than 10% likelihood of it occurring. 2 is possible, so a 1 to 20% likelihood. 3 is very possible, so a 20 to 50% likelihood. And if it's over 50%, then it's probable. And on the left-hand side, we've got the impact. So this is where you as a charity need to decide what the financial impact would be and what your levels are. So obviously you can see the financial impact. For a small charity, any financial impact below £1,000 might be low. Moderate could be between £1,000 and £2,000. Major between 2 and 5, and critical could be over £5,000. But that's for you to decide as a charity. It then goes on to the scoring matrix. So once you've multiplied that score there by that score there, it will fit into the scoring matrix, and that helps identify if the risks are green, so just need routine monitoring, amber, they're a medium priority, or red, they're a high priority and actions need taking straight away. We then look at risk reporting, so who's going to review the risk register and when and how often, and that's your policy. So once you've written your policy, it's been approved by the trustees, you now need to develop your risk register. But how do you do this? Well, here are some key steps in developing your risk register. And once we've just gone through these, we're then going to dive into the risk register template and I can show you how to complete it. So, decide who you want to include in developing the risk register. Should it be trustees only? Should it be just trustees and charity managers, or all colleagues? Depending on the size of the organisation, I think it's best to include everyone, as often people who are working on the ground have really great insights into the day-to-day and what they do and what the risks are there. The next thing I would probably do is hold a separate session, hold a workshop on risk management, and advise people that you're going to look at risk management not just as the negative things that could happen, but the positive things that could happen too. So for example, say you've put in for a grant, and if you get awarded that grant, that's fantastic, you're bringing extra money in, but actually it could stretch your resources rather thin. So you just need to think of things like that. So what do you do at this workshop? Well, what I tend to do is just use whiteboards and post-it notes. So you want to make sure you capture all of the risks and then discuss them with your team. After you've done that, you want to score the risks in line with your policy. You should discuss whether you want to avoid, accept, reduce or transfer the risk. So what do I mean by that? Well, I think if you avoid a risk, that's quite obvious. You don't want the risk to be there anyway. Some risks you just have to accept. They're just integral. You can't get rid of them. No matter what policies, procedures, processes you have in place, there will always be some element of risk and you just have to accept it. Most risks you'll probably want to reduce the risk. So say it's a red risk, you want to reduce it down to an amber and then perhaps a green, or transferring the risk. And this is generally done by having insurance. For these risks, you then need to see what you already have in place to mitigate the risk, what policies, procedures, processes that are already there. And then think about what other things you may need to mitigate even further. You then need to decide who is responsible for that risk, and it should be an individual or a small team of individuals who actually take the ownership, and by taking the ownership they will help develop any of the things you need to do to mitigate further. And you also need to decide when the next review date is. So if something comes out as a red risk, then you'll probably want the review date sooner rather than later. And then you need to look at what the residual risk is. So after you've taken on board all the mitigations that you already have in place, what is the underlying risk? Has it gone from a red to an amber? Has it gone from an amber to a green? So now we're going to look at the Excel sheet and I'll show you how you can complete that. So let's dive into the risk management template. What I'm going to do first is talk you through all the tabs, and then I can show you how to complete it. So the first page, we've got the heat map. So this is if you like to see things pictorially, you can use it to put the number of your risk on there and then show each time how it's moved. So say you had a risk in here and it had moved down to amber, you can show the direction of the movement. The next tab is your summary risk register, and this links to all these individual tabs here. So it will state the type of risk, a brief description, how it's currently rated, red, amber, green, who's responsible for it, what the retained risk is, and once you start to get into this on a regular basis, what was the status of the retained risk on the previous version of the risk register, if its current status is stable, rising or falling, and any additional comments you wish to make. At the top here, you can put the date that it was reviewed. If we just go to the list bit now, this feeds into the sheets one here to here. So please don't alter the avoid, accept, reduce, transfer or the red, amber, green, but you can alter this in terms of what type of risk it is. Now I think we've captured the main risks here. We've got finance or funding, marketing, communications or reputation, governance, physical resources and infrastructure, human resources. Is it an operational risk, a safeguarding risk or a regulatory risk? So if we go to tab 1, it's the same as any other tab. It's got number 1 on it. You've got a little drop down here. Say it's a finance risk, finance and funding risk. We'll type that in there. We'll then type a description of the risk. So failure to secure enough funding for X project going forward. Would help if I could spell, wouldn't it? So then you can look at, are there any contributing factors to this? What's the impact if you don't do anything about that risk? So in this example, will people have to be made redundant? Will you have to not deliver a service that's vital to beneficiaries? But also, does it present you with any opportunities? Then looking at the risk scoring matrix that you came up before, you need to assess the likelihood and the impact. So if the impact is 4 and the likelihood is 3, that will automatically turn red. You then go through what controls you have to mitigate already, what controls you should have to mitigate and what you have in place already. You look at your risk tolerance, so in this case we probably want to reduce it, and then you put in your reason for wanting to reduce it. You go through any additional controls that might be needed, they might not. You say who's responsible, when they're next going to look at it, and when the next review date is. And then taking all of this in place, you decide what your retained heat map is. Let's say it's red in this instance. So then if we go back to the summary risk register, you can see it's brought all of that through. And you can complete that for all the different areas of risk. If you need to complete a new risk, you can just right click on there, go to move or copy, create a copy, move it to after that number, update it with the number, and then you just need to update this and link it through. So that's a quick overview of risk management, the risk management policy and the risk register template. Hopefully you found it useful. Thank you.